Welcome to Political Speaking, the podcast where we unpack social political issues that matter to Singaporeans one conversation at a time. I'm Terry Shi, and today we are diving into the latest and hottest news in Singapore, the Electoral Boundary Review changes. So for those who are familiar, the EBRC is a committee convened by the Prime Minister's office to review and to redraw the electoral boundaries before each general election. So while the EBRC in its report asserts that these revisions are based on demographic shift and fair representation, critics argue that the changes inside the report often disadvantage the opposition-leaning areas, particularly those that have performed well in the previous election. So this year's revision are no different, with 6 new single-member constituencies being created and 5 being removed, along with 5 new GRCs being created. These changes introduce 4 more parliamentary seats, increasing from the 93 seats to 97 seats and expanding the total electoral divisions from 31 to 33. So opposition voices have raised concerns that these changes disrupt strongholds where they have previously performed well, such as the Progress Singapore Party, which previously contested in the West Coast GRC. So the question here is, are the redrawn boundaries fairly drawn, or simply is this gerrymandering at play? And how will this boundary changes affect the upcoming election, which might happen in the next 2 months? So joining here with me today to unpack these issues are 2 guests, historian and politician commentator, Dr Thum Ping Tjin, Managing Director of New Naratif, and also a visiting researcher of Kyoto University. And we have also Sean Francis Han, former editor-in-chief of Wake Up Singapore, and currently a PhD student at the National University of Singapore. So what has exactly changed from in this EBRC report? And why are the opposition parties calling foul? So let us break this down. Maybe first, can we have PJ to chime in your thoughts over what the EBRC report has come up?
I mean, Terry, New Naratif has done a lot of research about this, and let's not beat around the bush, right? This is just blatant gerrymandering as usual, as they have done every election since the 1980s. And what we see is the same broad pattern where opposition non-PAP parties do well, especially if they are above 40% at the last election. Those constituencies, if they're SMCs, they disappear. I think Phuket Batok is the main example here. Or GRCs, they get sliced up, they get redistributed, right? So this pattern has stretched back decades now. And what we're seeing, I think, is the most egregious example. One quick study online argued that 1 in 3 voters are ending up in a different constituency this time around. I think the last time it was 1 in 5, and we all thought that was bad, but now it's 1 in 3. And there are a lot of problems with how the constituencies have been redrawn, which I can go into later, right? But fundamentally, the constituencies are not being drawn to reflect natural communities. That's the point of a constituency. It's meant to be a natural community. And New Naratif has pointed this out again and again, that there is a very logical natural community in Singapore that you should base constituencies on, and it's called the HDB planning area, or the HDB New Town, right? But instead, we see new towns being chopped up, divided between different constituencies, and all for what? To preserve the PAP, or as I've said in previous podcasts, as we academics like to say, to maximize outcomes for the PAP by picking their voters to ensure that a constituency is as favorable as possible. So that's what we're seeing again.
Fully agree there with PJ, right? I mean, I think also just kind of like maybe one thing to say, perhaps it's a little bit of an obvious point, right? But I think it's important to point out that the EBRC report's reasoning on this issue is very thin, right? So there is this use of statistics, use of numbers to try and sort of justify the new electoral boundaries, right? They cite new estates like Tengah coming up, the need to adjust boundaries in order to make sure that there's adequate representation for Singaporeans. But that makes, it doesn't quite make sense, right? It doesn't quite add up, right? It could suggest, right? Perhaps that line of reasoning might suggest why we might have needed to go from 93 to 97 seats, but it doesn't tell us. It is no justification for the way in which the boundaries are drawn, right? I think most egregious of which would be like Marine Parade Braddell Heights. Like, what on earth is that? How would any of the statistics or the numbers in the report justify this aberrant creation that is Marine Parade Braddell Heights? Yeah.
Can I just point out that the EBRC justified a lot of its changes by saying population increase. Now, first of all, we all know that's not a natural population increase, right? The PAP's policy is to stuff Singapore with more and more and more immigrants. Okay, and we can talk about that. Good thing, bad thing, we've talked about it elsewhere, and all the problems that come with it. But the fact is, when virtually every constituency all across the island has seen population increase, just because we are now stuffed with, 6 million people, or how many people do you have in Singapore now? 6 million, is it? 6 million?
Around 6 million.
6 million, right? And the population increase has far outstripped the PAP's own planning. So naturally, when the EBR says, oh, the population has increased, so we change it this way. Well, the population has increased everywhere. It makes no difference where so saying that because population increased, so we redraw, is like saying, oh, the sky is blue, so we redraw. It's not unique to any constituency at this point.
Why can't it be just simply equally divided? Why you have to ensure that it's like 1 to 23,000 or 24,000? Can't you just equally divide? Even if the population would increase, just simply make it such that an MP would have to bear the burden of caring for more residents, rather than saying that, oh, we have to put in more seats. The whole idea of trying to keep pegging this increase of parliamentary seats to the number of the citizens, I think is really, really unfair. If this is the same practice, right, adopted, say, in United States, for example, right, how many senators do they expect to have? I mean, every time you have new immigrants coming in, you would then increase the number of senators in the US Congress.
But I think, Terry, you're making a very important point there, because first of all, we have to acknowledge, right, all parliaments are arbitrary. The way things work, it's arbitrary. We, as citizens, should be deciding for ourselves, right, what kind of parliament we have, how it's going to work, right, how we want to elect people. We get no say in any of that, because we have authoritarian one-party government that, doesn't have public consultation on any of these things. But the second is, if we agree, okay, Parliament is the highest legislative body in the country, and it makes laws and the things that it do. Singapore is basically a parliamentary dictatorship, right? The only debate you're allowed is within that chamber, and only for like half an hour, and then you got the guillotine. So the problem is that then, because of these very strict rules on how debate is conducted in Parliament and how legislation is passed, you've got more and more MPs, but the same amount of time. Fewer and fewer opportunities for an MP to speak, right? And more, because there are more and more MPs, the opposition, which I think is still fixed at 12 with the NCMP scheme, is also diluted,
correct,
right? So there's all these issues, and who is making this decision, right? This unelected body, unaccountable to anyone except the Prime Minister, meets in secret, gives us a nonsense report, right, with the worst justification, non-existent justification, and it deeply affects how our laws are made, how our debates happen, the fundamental nature of what remains of our democracy. And this is completely wrong.
I also want to jump off of that point, right, which is to emphasize that not only was the reasoning in the EBRC report very, very thin, right? But I really didn't like this slant, right, where they say that, we're not going to touch or redraw opposition wards, right? That's the best practice. We're not going to disrupt existing opposition wards, right? I think this was a very odd odd thing to say, right? Because that's never been the complaint. If you go and look at Pritam Singh's complaint, it's that SMCs which are hotly contested get absorbed into GRCs, not that existing opposition wards get meddled with, right? And this is precisely what we're looking at now. They can say, yeah, we didn't touch the opposition wards in the east. But just look at what's happened to Chee Soon Juan's stronghold in Bukit Batok SMC, right? Those are the grounds that he's been working for so many years. I mean, look at what's happened to that. Absorbed into Jurong East Bukit Batok GRC, which, as he's pointed out, is 5 times the size of Bukit Batok, formerly Bukit Batok SMC. And then now Tan Cheng Bock also is in another pickle, right? His electoral boundaries have been redrawn. So it's a very, very, I think, deceptive reasoning. And you know, it's part of this broader complaint that I have with the government, which is that the things they say are not blatantly false. They're deceptive, right? Yes, you didn't touch the opposition wards, right? But you've definitely meddled in the hotly contested areas in the West. You've definitely done that. And there is a pattern that in Pritam Singh's speech in Parliament, he has noted, right? It can be tracked. We've looked, this pattern is there for everybody to see. You're talking past the complaints that the opposition is making.
Don't you think that the constituency that they don't touch itself, right, also proves that the whole redrawing process is political in nature? Because if, right, the redrawing is based on pure population, based on statistics and whatnot, then by all means, Aljunied, Sengkang, GRC, Hougang should be redrawn because there's a change of demographic. But to have it that the EBRC can pick and choose that the opposition wards are not touched means that political consideration are being
precisely
put in place.
Right. So you cannot on the one hand state that, oh, we are not going to take past election results into consideration of the EBRC, but then turn around on the other hand and then say it is part of our best practice, you know, to be so generous as to not touch the opposition one. You cannot say these two things at the same time, right? You have to pick one line of reasoning and pursue it.
What assurance do we have that the EBRC does not refer to the results from the general election? Because they do refer to the population statistics, the HDB planning guideline and what demarcation, but at the same time, do they refer to the results? I'm not just saying about the how much percent they get. It's really about to the minute, to the very fine polling districts that we are talking about. A lot of voters don't realize this. The resolution that the political parties have when it comes to voting is not just based on district, meaning like GRC or SMC. They actually can fine tune to like a few blocks, meaning I know like this 4 or 5 blocks, HDB blocks, how they voted. Of course, I don't know each individually how they vote, but I know as a whole, this cluster of HDBs or private housing, how they vote. Say 50% or 55% voted for PAP, 45% voted for the opposition. And then the other side, opposite in the next neighborhood, you have like 60% voted for opposition, 40% voted for the PAP. And it is this kind of resolution, right, that would then give to means and ways of gerrymandering, because you would want to like cut and piece different clusters of HDBs so that you can somehow bring up your projected margin. So for regardless which party, it means you can be for ruling party or for opposition. But I'm just saying that with the breakdown of such so-called results, it means with this finality of the how people voted in the clusters, right? You can gerrymander to really find ways, not just simply cutting haphazardly from a GRC. See, the thing is, the chart I have here, right, are results that we got from the presidential election. So the presidential election, right, we have all the so-called the results, as in who voted for Ng Kok Siong, how many votes, who voted for Tharman, who voted Tan Kek. And these clusters, right, see that this one is MA02, MA12, etc. So all this, right, means that this is one cluster. So you can see this is one cluster. This is one cluster. So you see the MA36, MA37, MA35. 38, etc. This is all one cluster. Table that you just saw, I can actually have finality or say, how did people voted, and therefore when I cut, I can cut in such manner. So it's not just say haphazardly, which is go back to my initial question. Did the EBRC refer to such details? Because if they
we
did,
don't know.
yeah, we don't know because they
That's
are
the
not
problem. No
accountable.
transparency, no accountability.
Correct.
And you get, look, if you just look at their report, right? I've got it here on the iPad. Look at somewhere like Sembawang, right? And why is it cut up between these different constituencies? And then you got this bit here that's drawing all the way. So you get this Marsiling UT, this big empty. What is this? You know? So this is just one example. If you look all over the map, you'll see a lot of, just from the density, right? You can see these are natural communities here, that they're being sliced up between different constituencies. And of course, the most famous and egregious, like you've got all these little communities that are being sliced up here for Marine Parade Braddell Heights. And why is Marine Parade Braddell Heights? So the only explanation is really, how did they vote? Because otherwise, why would you so precisely draw a line right down the center of an HDB planning area? You know, which comes back to the point. I think this is just blatant gerrymandering, and it's just
Yeah.
wrong.
So this is the previous one. So what happened is, okay, so you have McPherson going into this Marine Parade GRC, and then you have this weird cluster. If you can see, this one came in. This is a one cluster of HDB. This, okay, so you can't see from there, but here is one cluster. So this is one cluster. So why is this here? why is this being absorbed into this? Why can't the MPs, right, for or the candidates, right, be able to take care of this ward? Why is there a need to shift this cluster of residents over to the other? It's simply not natural. And why are you constantly shifting people from where they personally perceive to be, right, a Marine Parade guy, but then suddenly, because you just changed myself, I'm now a Potong Pasir person, right? It cannot be, right? I'm not sure who said that. I think it was PJ, where even if you don't move your house, right, you can just by a stroke of pen move your estate, like for every general election.
Yeah, I mean, I got a WhatsApp from someone who said, in Singapore, I live in Chengshan, then I live in Punggol, then I live in Pasir Ris, now I live in Jalan Kayu, all without moving house, just at the stroke of a pen. You know, that's Singapore for you.
How do you think this change would affect the election? Some people have actually noted, because of how they redraw the boundary, some particular parties are being forced to, as in some of the grounds in which they have worked over the past years, right, are actually encroached into the redrawn boundaries. So, for example, Bukit Batok is now merged with Jurong East, right? GRC, and then so would Chidrenjuan, would SDP go and contest the new GRC, or would he have to move to another place to contest? I think this is something that the parties have worked out. But then it brings to the question of whether such redrawing is deliberate to create conflict between the parties.
Can I just say props to Chee Soon Juan here, right? Because he staked a very, very early claim on the area, already kind of preempting that these kinds of weird bouts of aberrant electoral manipulation would happen. So he's already kind of staked his claim on that area, and he has reiterated recently that he will continue to contest. He will never back down, never say die. So props to him on that front, right? I think he will present a very powerful contest to that area, and it'd be nice to see what happens there, right? I'm also kind of looking forward to see what happens with Tan Cheng Bock, right? How he's going to sort of recalibrate and re-strategize in the areas that have been redrawn. The West Coast area. What I think is a little bit unfortunate, though, right, is that in the chaos of this regular redrawing of the boundaries, right, Goh Meng Seng, Lim Tian, and the PAR have come out to say that they're contesting 8 SMCs and 2 GRCs, which I have no idea how they're going to find the manpower to do that, and how they're going to avoid multi-corner fights. Also, I have no clue as to what's going to happen there. But I'm glad that Chee Soon Juan and Tan Cheng Bock are still have made that statement that they're going to keep contesting, going to keep fighting in the areas that they've been walking the grounds on.
Well, I think it's common for the opposition parties, right, to overstate where they're contesting so that they could somehow pressurize the stronger party to concede. So, for example, they have intention of contesting this SMC, which the stronger party is going to contest, but then say, okay, I will not contest this particular GRC or whatever, prevent a three-corner fight if you allow me to have a straight fight at this particular SMC. This is how the horse trading is done. So they will overstate, say that I have the resources, I have the candidates to contest all the places that I've claimed. But if you were to allow me to have a straight fight at this particular GRC or SMC, I will back out from the places that you are more keen on, and then to strike a deal. And which is why I personally think that this type of so-called trade, this whole type of horse trading, right, should not be condoned, because it does not promote any good sense of it's not good for politics in Singapore, because you encourage people who are just planting flag without really having to walk the ground, without having to so-called do the groundwork for the
Precisely.
years before.
So that's why whenever
election,
people say that, oh, the opposition has no unity, or there are these opportunists within the opposition, right? Yes, I get where you're coming from, but at the same time, what is it that makes it possible for these opportunists within the opposition to come and stake flags in random areas? It's precisely because the electoral boundaries keep getting withdrawn. If the electoral boundaries were a bit more stable, opposition parties could start to make footholds. They could start to, get a grasp on a particular area, work the ground, really get to know the constituents, right? And then this kind of weird, this kind of weird opportunistic behavior wouldn't happen, right? So it's a chicken and egg situation. Like, yes, we should demand more from the opposition, but I think also let's not lose sight of the fact that this situation is, I think, quite deliberately engendered by the ruling party.
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem. It's a point that we brought up before. The system creates incentive structures. A first past the post system favors two parties, right? A two-party system. This is a problem you see in any country that has a traditional Westminster system or inherited one from the British. And of course, let's not forget, Singapore's system is not just Westminster, it's Westminster colonial, designed to perpetuate and create a very strong authoritarian party, and to govern on behalf of global capitalism, right? So Singapore's system is at fault here, and it comes down to the fact that we as Singaporeans don't get to decide how our system is created or run, or what's the best way. Some studies show that for a small limited city like Singapore, a proportional representation creates better, more productive outcomes by creating more representation, for example, right? But ultimately, it should be we Singaporeans trying to figure things out for ourselves. Having lots and lots of parties is not a bad thing, right? Because Singapore is very diverse. You want lots of parties to represent all the different interest groups in Singapore. That's how parties are meant to be, right? But we all think of unity, must have, one party to oppose the PAP, because it's a first past the post system, because that's how the incentive system structures work. So we can't really blame the opposition then for being desperate to be the only party, because, like I said, that's how the system works.
A first past the post system would eventually end up with two parties. Eventually, we currently do not see that because the opposition or the alternate party is not strong enough. But eventually, say Workers' Party would gain a foothold, having say if their whole plan to gain the whole east side were to succeed, then we would see a gradual either a two-party or three-party system. But eventually, you all boils down to
And I think
system.
another very dangerous thing about this system, right, is let's imagine that, okay, let's say that the WP really manages to gain a solid foothold and a secure ground in the East, what kind of Singapore are we looking at then? East versus West? I mean, what kind of weird polarization is this? Oh, you are opposition. Oh, I'm PAP. I mean, we're Singaporean, right? Why are we in a system that seems to set up this polarization of the people through political parties? I mean, this is not a system that works. This is not a good system. We're looking at what's happening as a result of this in the US right now, right? It's right there as a blatant example for us to look at. This is not something we want to emulate or keep on going down the road in. Right? This is a bad system.
Yeah, either you're red state or blue state. And Singapore, frankly, is that small. It's so small that it's pointless to have such geographical demarcation. And as we are discussing now, the first past the goal system, frankly, does not, as in spur good democracy, because eventually it will be on a two-party system. And I personally also support the more parties, the merrier, because you have a wide spectrum of people, diverse views. But then the current political system, which is the first past the goal election system, right, does not promote such, because eventually either you would just pardon my language, clusterfuck, and then end up benefiting the ruling party, or you would then slowly start to be tribal and then form up into different gangs or the alliances to try and stake a foothold on the remaining places where you can reasonably have probability of winning a seat.
I just want to make this point. I've been looking at the map behind you, right? It's like it's just so blatant. Where the boundaries redrawn? East Coast, West Coast, Jurong, Bukit Batok, Marine Parade,
Yep.
right? Everywhere that the PAP, which is Iswaran's constituency, with Heng Swee Kiat, Tan Chuan Jin, right? Where is Chi Sun Juan running? Right? Everything. Punggol, all with redrawn. Where is it not redrawn? Oh, Lawrence Wong's constituency, Chan Chun Sing's constituency, Shanmugam's constituency. Everywhere. Vivian's, only slightly, Holland Bukit Timah slightly, right? All like anchor ministers whom they feel are not just solid, but are not going to get challenged. Josephine Teo, right, nobody likes her, right? As Jom's survey found out, but she's going up against Lim Tian. Nobody's going to vote for Lim Tian, so she's secure, so they don't need to redraw, right? Bishuan Toa Payoh, that spying down the center of Singapore with all the heavyweight ministers and or the parties which nobody is going to vote for, right? All not withdrawn. East, the far west, where everything is at risk, redrawn. You just look at that map behind you, Terry. It is so ridiculously blatant. I don't see how anyone can look at that map and not say that there is no gerrymandering going on.
It just goes back to our earlier point, in which does the EBRC refer to the results? And then it's based on what PJ you have highlighted, right? Is that they don't dare to tinker the wards that have proven to be right. You either take away or you bring in, you might not get the same result from the previous election. So that's why they don't really meddle with the thing. But for the wards that they stand a risk of losing, they would then try to shift clusters of flats where they have a higher percentage over. This is speculation, but then it's most likely to be the case. If not, why? The question that we have been asking, why would you, for no reason, shift the clusters of housing over to the new GRCs?
And to add to the point earlier, we were saying like they keep justifying things. Oh, population increase, demographic change. You're telling me there's no population increase or demographic change in Ang Mo Kio, Masing UT, Nee-Soon, Holland Bukit Timah, Bishuan Toa Payoh, or Jalan Besar. Come on. Why is there only demographic shift and population change in these areas which so conveniently map onto where the PAP is at risk? It just beggars belief. They think we're so stupid. They just lie to our faces, right? And they think we're going to buy it. Well, of course, they're going to win the next
And I
election.
think the
So,
reason that they can lie so blatantly and gerrymander so blatantly, right, is really because of the dominance, the absolute hegemony that the ruling party has. It becomes very difficult or a little bit more insidious when the government performs its gerrymandering, because it's not like in the US where you have red states and blue states, right? Where you have states that have really gone to one party or the other and then have their boundaries being redrawn, right? In Singapore, there's a very sort of interesting surreptitious maneuver here, right? Wherein it's the close contests that get redrawn. The opposition wards that have already been secured are left there, right? And so unless you go back historically and you look at the trends, right, you can't exactly see the gerrymandering going on, right? So if you haven't sort of been looking at new narrative or analysis, looking at and describing the gerrymandering, right? It's perhaps not as in your face as what you might see in the US. So again, that's another very sort of insidious problem that we have with gerrymandering in Singapore.
With the release of the EBRC report, it was immediately 1 day after the budget has been passed. Would you envision to see this the upcoming election being held anytime soon?
well, the voter rolls are open till end of March, right? So not before April. But yeah, it's entirely possible. It's like reading tea leaves. Who's gonna know? It's up to the prime minister. Then they'll call a snap election, and that will be that. So it could be any time in April, or it could be as late as September, October. We don't know.
Mothership has a nice article on this. So they've been looking at the last few elections, and they've stated, yeah, it typically happens about 1 to 3 months after the EBRC report is released. So I think that's a reasonable time frame that we can look at.
So today I wrote the article calling out the bullshit, because you think about it, the state media reporters, right, are essentially already told to keep their leave open, to freeze their leave in April and May. So why all go through or past the statistics shows that 3 months and one not, based on what is actually happening, right? You can really just tell the election will happen in the next 2-3 months. There's no need to go through statistics. You just simply go to ask the reporter, hey, have your boss told you to prepare for election? Because this is all their machinery. You can just go to the police officer, ask, hey, have you been asked to block your leave? You go to the teacher, ask, hey, have you been asked told to stand by? This, given how much manpower is involved in the whole general election, right? It's impossible to keep a secret, where everyone actually, frankly, would have known that when the election would roughly be started. In fact, the MPs themselves would already have known when as in the PAP MP, not the opposition MP. PAP MP would have known when the election would be held. And that's why they are doing all the walkabouts and whatnot. And which is why it's so ridiculous. Why is the voters being kept out from the loop? And then and the ruling party, because the prime minister calls a shot when the election is held, to have their cards close to their chest. This is not a transparent government in that sense. That you already have this whole thing planned out. You have the journalists in the thick, in the sense that they know when the election is going to be held. You have the civil servants who know when the election is going to be held, and that everyone else is being kept in the dark. How is this acceptable? In the sense that this is something that is of public interest. This is something that is of national interest. This shouldn't be something that is being kept secret for the sake of political advantage. And if they can do this for this instant, meaning for general election, what else can they not do?
I think what is particularly also horrifying, right, is the fact that with these constant redrawings of the electoral boundaries, right, you get this phenomena wherein it's just so difficult, it's so chaotic, it's such a rush from the release of the EBRC to the actual election date. Now put yourself in, like, let's say Chee Soon Juan's shoes right now, right? He's been walking the ground in Bukit Batok SMC, right? Suddenly, it gets absorbed into Jurong East Bukit Batok GRC, right? he has only, let's say, generously, right, 3 months, okay, generously 3 months, could be 1 month, okay, could be way less than 3 months, okay. He has this short amount of time to not only gather together and form the team that is going to run for the SDP, right? But then he also has to go and walk the ground in these new areas, re-strategize, do all of that messaging all over again in that short amount of time, right? So the EBRC and the constant withdrawing of the electoral boundaries, right? It's not just a strange, gerrymandering where they cut Singapore into weird parts. It's a very powerful part of the PAP machinery, right? That works very much in tandem to make it extremely, extremely difficult for opposition politicians to run. Think about the short amount of time that you have as an opposition candidate to readjust to the new boundaries, right? And the short amount of time to walk the ground, to go and do your messaging, whether on social media or whatever, right? Just think about the absolute difficulty that the opposition faces every single time Singapore goes up for an election. The EBRC is really just one tool in this giant set, in this giant edifice that the government wields against the opposition.
And the PEP gaslight people saying that, the opposition didn't walk the ground. They have all this time and then they didn't walk the ground. Yeah, of course, you draw the boundary. Of course, how would he know?
So
that,
not only not only
did
you bankrupt, right, Hsien, right? Not only do you go after the opposition, right? Then you say, but you have to go and walk the ground, right? And walk the ground as much as we do, despite the fact that we're taking the highest ministerial salaries in the world, right? And then on top of that, you go and change the electoral boundaries, right? How many layers of oppression, how much of the machinery do you need to put onto the opposition?
Former Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, who's a senior minister now, has run the country for 20 years, from 2004 to 2024. When he took office, he made lots of promise, improve TFR to address the issue of immigration, improve the standard of living for Singaporeans. All this promise, I believe, he has never fulfilled. Over his 20 years of time. The only promise he has fulfilled is to fix the opposition. Yeah. So this is what Sean the Sean's comment actually remind me of. The only promise the only thing that Lee Hsien Loong kept to his word is that if there's increase of opposition, he will have to spend all his time fixing the opposition.
What is the opposition's job? It's not to help the PAP do a better job. Their job is to make life miserable for me so that I screw up and they can come in and sit where I am here and take charge. Right now we have Loh Teck Yang, we have Chiam, we have Steve Chia. So we can deal with them, it's okay. But supposing you had a parliament with 10, 15, 20 opposition members out of 80. Then instead of spending my time thinking of what is the right policy for Singapore, I'm going to spend all my time, I have to spend all my time thinking, what is the right way to fix them? What's the right way to buy my own supporters over? How can I solve this week's problem?
The point I'd like to make is, ultimately, why have elections? Why even have elections? All the PAP wants with an election is to justify their authoritarianism for 4 or 5 more years. Justify their monopoly on power. But they can't even pretend to have a free, fair election. And the whole point of elections in countries is really a time to think, to reflect, to consider where we've been, where we're going, right? To look at the different opportunities, the different platforms that parties are putting in front of us, have sober debate about our future, opportunities for change, opportunities for new people to step up, for old people to, go gracefully, to sashay away. But in Singapore, elections are none of those things. We pervert the whole point of elections by having just this quick, rapid snap. It's almost like we're ashamed of elections, It's like quick, let's get it done. Okay, 4 more years, 5 more years, it's ridiculous. So ultimately, you look at our elections, the whole point is just really to justify the 5 more years of a monopoly of power by the PAP. And that's why they've changed everything to this farce. So yeah, I think again we come back to the question: what kind of country do we want? And do we really want for things to get so bad that everything falls apart and then we change? That's too late.
It's similar to how they pass laws, isn't it? In other countries where you have, other than white paper, you have green paper, you have means months of consultation. Whereas in Singapore, once you have the first reading for the introduction, the next month you would immediately have the second and third. So it's really rushing everything through. I think it's just going through the motion. And in this, for the election, is simply the going through the motion so that their blank check is being signed by the population. What they are asking for is not mandate. What they are asking for is for you to sign on the dotted line, the blank check, for them to fill in whatever figure they want. And then whenever, say, there's some like unhappiness about certain policy that they introduce or whatever, they say, oh, the people actually have chosen. The people have given us the mandate to do whatever we want. And this is what people have to really remember when you go to the ballot booth. That do you want to give a blank check to the PAP? Because this is what they're going to say every time for the next 4 or 5 years. If you were to vote them in, they would say that, oh, you have given us the mandate to do like to deal with, say, someone like Iswaran, to deal with issues like the Rideout Road, the way how they did. Maybe before we conclude, can we like get the panelists to share what's your thought on the upcoming election? Like I've shared a lot just now. Like maybe start with Sean.
Well, I mean, just to conclude, I'd like to say, the EBRC report, the new electoral boundaries, they're really nothing that was surprising, right? I mean, the fact that Chee Soon-juan or politicians came out to stake early claims on territories, I think is apparent that we know that this is going to happen. Nothing has changed, right? I mean, arguably it's gotten even worse, right? I just still cannot wrap my head around Marine Parade, Braddell Heights, how the inland and the beach somehow have been fused together. Beautiful, right? But I don't know. I'd like to say that I am very hopeful. I think we've seen like that resilience again from people like Chee Soon-juan, Tan Cheng Bock, right? Tan Cheng Bock is still contesting despite his age, right? And as well as the WP is still going strong, right? So I'm very, very glad that despite all of these challenges, all of these strange maneuvers that have been happening with the EBRC, as well as with all the other mechanisms of power, right? These opposition parties have stood their ground. They've stood on business. They've really, really, kept their head high and kept fighting. So I'm very, very excited to see the kind of fights that these parties will put up. And I'm hoping that the PAR, will find some way to collaborate and communicate with the rest of the opposition parties. But I mean, that's for us to see. That's going to be the drama of the election that plays out as it does. So yeah, looking forward.
I think for me, someone asked me, right, listening to the podcast, on the one hand, you're like, come on, Singapore, fight, right? Your vote matters, and, you need to decide what country you want versus, the PAP is definitely going to win because they cheat, they gerrymander, they rig, right? Short of actually ballot stuffing, they do everything else. How do you reconcile this? And I think the point I want to make is that an election feels so determinative because of how our system is. All the weight is on that one X you put in the box. But actually, there are so many other ways to create change in Singapore. And, even in a place like Singapore, right, you have to remember that an election is just a snapshot of how people feel on one day every 5 years. They're not going to feel the same the day after, let alone a year after that. So that's the first thing. An election is not, something that is set in stone for 5 years. An election is just a snapshot, a really important snapshot, right? But it's just that, a snapshot. People will change, things will change, events will change, and you as a Singaporean, your responsibility as a citizen is to fight for change, is to fight for the change that you want to see. And there are so many different ways to do that, right? To take part in the system. Everything from writing letters, going to the meet the people sessions, right? Getting together with other people, organizing and forming or joining a civil society group, an NGO, a charity, right? All the way to, of course, protesting or even running for office yourself. There's all these different things you can do. So don't feel like elections is just one off. That's it. They cheat. They steal the election and then there's nothing but powerless. No, elections just a snapshot. But after that, you have to keep fighting for the country you want. But fighting for the country you want also means you have to start talking about it with yourself and with other people, because you need to decide what kind of country you want. If you sit back and you go, apolitical, that means you're giving up the right to decide what country you want. It means you're letting other people decide for you. The responsibility of citizen is to participate. And I know we're exhausted and I know everything's expensive and we're struggling. But part of the reason why we're exhausted, overworked, struggling, cost of living is so high is because we didn't participate enough and fight enough for a country which takes care of us, right? We're in this mess because we, in the past, have been apolitical and not participatory enough. And if you don't want things to get worse, we're going to have to find that energy somewhere, somehow, to fight. So that's my message to Singapore.
The general election is one of the rare occasions where Singaporeans feel empowered. This is the few occasions in Singaporeans' life where they feel that they have control over their destiny, where they drop this sense of helplessness. As PJ pointed out, I think people have to realize how important your vote is, and why many Singaporeans are actually looking forward to the general election, even though the date has not been set. And this is in 10 years. This has been 10 years since there is the political rallies. So I think this is something that everyone will be looking for. And so with this, we have explored today's session, which is about the Singapore's electoral boundary revision, and also the implication for the political competition in Singapore for the upcoming election. So the question still remains, despite all our discussion: are the changes for the EBRC report fair and representation, or do they create an uphill battle for the opposition parties? With the general election on the horizon, all eyes will be on how all this adjustment play out at the poll. So to our listeners, what do you think? Share in the comments. So do the boundary changes make the election fairer, or do they tilt the playing field? So do share your thoughts there. So that's all for today, and thank you for tuning on to Political Speaking. A big thank you to Dr. Thum Ping Tjin for being here, and Sean Francis Han for sharing with your insight. So don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and join us next time as we continue to discuss the issues that shape Singapore's future, especially when SG is coming. So until then, take care and stay politically engaged. Bye-bye.